Rain lashed against the cracked windows of the old apartment as Aisha tied Daniel's shoelaces with quick, practiced fingers. The clock on the wall ticked past 7, reminding her that she was already running late for work. She grabbed her bag, stuffed with her cafe uniform and a half-filled notebook she used as a diary, and then reached for Daniel's small hand. "Come on, Beta, we'll miss the bus," she said, trying to sound cheerful even though her voice trembled with fatigue. Daniel nodded, his eyes half open with sleep, but he smiled at her anyway. That smile was what kept her alive. Outside, the sky was dark with heavy clouds, and the city smelled of wet concrete. The rain poured in sheets, soaking them within minutes. Their umbrella had broken 2 weeks ago, but buying a new one meant giving up 2 meals. So Aisha tilted her dupatta over her son's head, shielding him as best as she could. The little boy clung to her hand, skipping over puddles while his worn-out shoes splashed mud onto his trousers. By the time they reached the bus stop, Aisha's hair was plastered to her forehead, and Daniel was shivering. She rubbed his arms to keep him warm, whispering, "It's okay, Jan, just a little while and we'll be at school." The bus arrived, screeching to a halt, and she quickly helped him climb aboard before squeezing in behind him. The bus was crowded, noisy with chatter, but she kept her arms around Daniel protectively. She didn't care if her back ached or if her feet hurt from standing all day, her only fear was that he would ever feel unsafe. At school, she bent down, wiped the raindrops from his cheek, and kissed his forehead. "Study well, okay, I'll pick you up later. Promise you won't be late?" he asked, eyes wide with worry. "I promise," she said, forcing a confident smile. But she knew there were no guarantees. Sometimes her shift stretched late into the night, and Daniel had to wait in the school office until she could rush to get him. From the school, she hurried straight to the cafe, arriving breathless, her uniform sticking to her damp skin. The manager, a gruff man with little patience, glanced at her with irritation. "Late again, Aisha. If this continues, you'll lose this job too." She lowered her head, murmured an apology, and went straight to work. Hours blurred together as she carried trays, refilled cups, and scrubbed tables, her body aching but her mind focused only on one thing, earning enough to keep her son's world steady. When her shift finally ended, exhaustion hung on her like a heavy cloak. She rushed back toward the school, her heart pounding with each step. The rain had slowed but left the streets slick and slippery. Her dupatta clung to her shoulders, and her hair stuck out in damp strands, but she didn't care. All she cared about was Daniel. When she entered the school, the receptionist looked at her with concern. "Miss Aisha, your son fainted during class. The doctor said he's weak, maybe from not eating properly." Her heart stopped. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet as panic surged through her. She ran to the infirmary, where Daniel lay pale and still on a narrow bed. His small hands, usually warm and mischievous, were cold against her palm. "Mama," he whispered weakly as his eyes fluttered open. "I'm here, Jan, I'm here," she murmured, kissing his forehead and blinking away tears. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, stood nearby. "He needs proper rest and nutrition. Children need balance, healthy food, enough sleep, less stress. He's strong, but if this continues, he'll keep getting sick." Aisha swallowed hard, shame and fear mixing in her chest. She nodded quickly, promising to do better. But she knew the truth. Every rupee she earned was already stretched too thin. Rent, electricity, food, school fees, everything consumed her paycheck before it even reached her hands. She skipped meals so Daniel could eat. She stayed awake late at night stitching clothes for neighbors to earn a little extra. Still, it never seemed enough. That night, as she carried Daniel home in her arms, too tired to walk himself, her heart broke. His head rested on her shoulder, his breath shallow but steady, and she whispered into his hair, "I'll raise you alone, my love. I don't need anyone's help. We'll survive this. I'll make sure you never feel less than anyone else." She meant it. With every ounce of her soul, she meant it. But she didn't see that someone was watching. Across the street, half hidden beneath a sleek black car's tinted window, stood Samir Khan. He had only come here on business, his driver taking a wrong turn through the narrow lanes. But fate had stopped him in his tracks when he saw her. At first, he had noticed only the frail boy in his mother's arms, the way the child's head lolled tiredly against her shoulder. But then his eyes traveled to the woman, drenched, exhausted, but walking with her spine straight and her chin lifted. She carried herself not with despair, but with dignity. And in her eyes, he saw a determination that shook him. Samir Khan was not a man easily moved. He had built an empire with his own hands, fought ruthless competitors, and climbed every ladder of power. But the sight of that woman and her child pierced through the walls he had built around his heart. She didn't look like someone asking for pity. She looked like someone silently challenging the world to break her, and daring it to fail. For the first time in years, Samir felt something stir inside him. Curiosity, respect, and an ache he couldn't quite name. As Aisha disappeared into the distance, clutching her son tightly, he stood frozen, unable to shake the image from his mind. He didn't know her name, her story, or the battles she fought. But he knew one thing: he wanted to. And without realizing it, her path had already crossed his. The morning sun rose hesitantly through the clouds, streaks of gold breaking over the weary city. Aisha stirred awake to the sound of something unfamiliar, a deep, rhythmic thrum that shook the glass panes of her small apartment. At first, she thought it was construction, another disturbance in her already restless life. But as the sound grew louder, rattling cups in the cupboard, she rushed to the window. Her breath caught in her throat. Hovering above the open ground beside the apartment block was a helicopter, its polished body glinting in the early light. The blades whirred, scattering dust and papers across the street below. People had gathered, pointing and murmuring in disbelief. No one in this part of town had ever seen such a sight so close. Aisha frowned in confusion, clutching her son protectively as he woke up startled. "Mama, what's happening?" Daniel asked, his small fingers curling into her sleeve. "I don't know, Jan," she whispered, pressing him against her chest as though the noise could not touch him. Her heart pounded. Why would a helicopter come here, of all places? Before she could gather her thoughts, sleek black cars turned into the narrow street, their tires splashing through puddles left by the night's rain. Men in crisp suits stepped out, an odd sight against the peeling paint and broken pavements of the neighborhood. One of them walked toward her building, his polished shoes barely touching the ground. Moments later, there was a knock on her door. Aisha froze. She had never had visitors, never invited anyone into her fragile world. Fear knotted her stomach. She opened the door just a crack, ready to tell whoever it was to leave. "Miss Aisha." The man's voice was calm, respectful. "Mr. Samir Khan has sent us. He requests to meet you and your son. He is deeply concerned about your situation." Her eyes widened. The name was familiar, everyone in the city knew it. Samir Khan, the CEO, the man whose face appeared on magazine covers, who was spoken of with awe and envy. A man so far removed from her world that he might as well have belonged to another universe. "I think you've made a mistake," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "We don't know anyone by that name. Please leave." The man didn't flinch. "Madam, Mr. Khan is waiting." He would not ask if it weren't important. Before she could refuse again, Daniel tugged at her dupatta. His eyes were wide with wonder. "Mama, a helicopter. Can we see it? Please." Her heart twisted. He had never asked for toys, never complained when she couldn't buy him sweets, never demanded anything beyond her love. How could she deny him this small glimpse of magic? With a sigh, she nodded. "Just for a minute," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Minutes later, she found herself climbing into the helicopter, her son clutching her hand tightly, his face alight with excitement. The roar of the blades filled the air, and the city shrank beneath them as they rose higher. Daniel pressed his nose to the window, eyes sparkling with wonder. "Mama, we're flying," he shouted, laughter bubbling from him. For the first time in weeks, he looked like the carefree child he deserved to be. Aisha, however, sat stiff, her heart racing. Across from her sat Samir Khan. He looked exactly as the world described him, tall, commanding, dressed in an immaculate suit that seemed untouched by the chaos of the world. Yet his eyes held something unexpected. They weren't cold or distant, they were warm, studying her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I saw you yesterday," he said finally, his voice low but steady, carrying easily over the hum of the engines. "You were carrying your son home in the rain. You reminded me of someone I once knew. Someone who fought the world with nothing but her willpower." Aisha straightened, lifting her chin. "If you're here to offer charity, don't. I may be poor, but I'm not helpless. I can raise my son on my own." Samir leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't charity, it's respect. Do you know how many people I see every day? Men with power, women with wealth, leaders, officials, but none of them carried themselves the way you did last night. Soaked to the bone, exhausted, yet still walking with dignity. You didn't bow to the world. You inspire it. Her lips parted, words failing her. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Most saw only her struggles, her poverty, her lack. No one saw her strength, not until now. Samir continued, softer this time. You've done more for your son than many people with far greater resources. But strength doesn't always mean walking alone. Sometimes, real strength means allowing someone to stand beside you. Daniel, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, tugged at his mother's arm. Mama, look, we're above the clouds. His laughter rang out, pure and unburdened. Aisha's eyes filled with tears at the sight of him. That laughter had been missing from their lives for far too long. She turned back to Samir, her voice trembling. I promised myself I would never depend on anyone. Life has taught me that people leave. Promises break. I can't risk my son's heart being shattered. Samir's expression softened, and for a moment, the powerful CEO looked almost vulnerable. I understand. I've seen promises break too. I've lost people I thought would never leave. But maybe that's why I stopped at nothing when I saw you yesterday. Because I don't want you to keep carrying everything alone. You deserve more. He deserves more. His words sank into her, breaking through the walls she had built over the years. She had always thought of letting someone in his weakness, but here was a man who wasn't trying to strip her dignity, he was honoring it. The helicopter soared higher, the city unfolding beneath them like a patchwork of dreams and struggles. Daniel's eyes sparkled as he whispered, Mama, we're flying home. Her throat tightened. She held him close, pressing her cheek against his hair, and for the first time in years, she let her guard slip. Maybe home wasn't just four walls and a roof. Maybe home could also be the people who stood beside you, the ones who lifted you when you thought you couldn't go on. She glanced at Samir, her eyes glistening but steady. I don't know what the future holds. But for my son, I'm willing to listen. A slow smile touched his lips, the kind that carried both relief and promise. And as the helicopter carried them above the broken streets they had always known, Aisha felt something stir inside her chest. Something she hadn't dared feel in years. Hope.